woman. Like, remember the scene when she first comes there and she says, I asked for Junior Suite. She says, I need to sleep with my clothes, nor do I sleep in my clothes. I need 2 rooms, right? So,
Definitely.
yeah.
The idea that
Trying to think of a recent example on social media.
I go back to William Faulkner. And a professor of literature, I always say that we have to look subtextually beneath that text. And of course, Shonda Rhimes is very peculiar as being a Hollywood writer because she is breaking away from the idea of the black arts movement, and I'm really huge on that, and really a scholar of that, whereas individuality versus that group think where she doesn't necessarily have to represent her blackness in being black heritage all the time.
Right.
And she breaks away and almost seems whitewashed. Black art movement people would say, or the black aesthetic critics would say back in the day, or the new black aesthetic critics would say, well, she's kind of almost selling out to an extent. Do you think there could be some type of agenda? Because it seems like not only are her shows a hit, they get on ABC and she makes millions and she makes stars out of people. Carrie was really like a C-level star in the movies. And then she's one of the biggest stars in Hollywood.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you think that there could be some subliminal message or subtextual connotations where we're trying to divide the home, so to speak, of the black male versus the black female? Because once again, I mentioned earlier, I don't think this would work even if she had a black love interest. It's something about the black woman that is starting to transcend. We mentioned Beyonce, that they're transcending. They can have white men and they don't necessarily need the powerful black male, and they can have powerful white men. They're deconstructing the whole idea of the gender hierarchical structure. Do you think this is something she's doing purposely so she can keep getting her shows? Because she has another show coming on, right?
She does.
Do you think this is making her, in essence, the most sought after and richest Hollywood writer right now working? Do you think this is some type of agenda that she has or that the networks have?
It's a good question. I don't know.
It's a loaded question,
Yeah, it is. I kind of go back to James Sneed. He had this fabulous essay on mass visual culture. And one of the things he talked about was when we got to, he wrote this back in the 90s, when we got to a place where you'd have more black people in production and film, would we be able to create productions that showcased who we were, what we're about, our cultural productions, or would we just get better at sort of anticipating what was expected of us? So in other words, can we predict what's likable, and then can we turn around and sell that? So it's sort of this idea, this Du Boisian consciousness, where you see yourself through the lens of someone else.
Or Dunbar, that mask. It's more that mask artistically.
So if you're in that space, have you just learned what the expectations are and you can do them? Or are you in a space where you're saying, we're going to take this step where we say art is not just art for art's sake. Art means something. It's political. It speaks to the needs of the people.
I think it's intentional, and I think it's very political. She has this process whereby she was able to get Grey's Anatomy on air, private practice, and it works for her. And think about it. She blatantly says it's colorblind casting. Right?
Yeah. That's part of that commercial.
It's colorblind. I don't see color. It's about who has the role. So I think, and that's the way the networks are going. Because like you said, if we had Idris Elba, who's an awesome actor, in the role of a fixer, because we could change it, gender blind as well, would it be a successful show? So I think it's intentional, and this is the accommodation that we were talking about before that is happening now. Shout out to the pastor and the professor. Check them out on YouTube.
Don't miss it.
Thank you. All right, so tell me your name.
My name is Minister Christopher Signal. I presented on African American clergy in elected office. I'm here representing Greater Works Ministry out of Columbus, Ohio. I want to give a shout out to the pastor and professor. 2014, NCBC, National Conference of Black Studies. Get big.
Yeah. So, Mr. Chris, I want you to tell us a little bit about the work you presented here at NCBS.
Absolutely. The work I presented on was African American clergy in elected office, making the transition from leading from a pulpit to leading in a legislator, leading from a mayor's office, the transition from activism to administration. How do you lead a diverse theological and ideological community as a preacher? How do you transcend partisan politics as a politician to being prophetic as a preacher, and the reconciliation between those two worlds, looking at contemporary examples of Floyd Flake and Meeks in Chicago to past examples such as Hiram Revels in Philadelphia, Mississippi, and looking at different trends that we find across the decade.
Yeah, and Adam Clayton Powell, a major.
Adam Clayton Powell, whose voice gets lost. People remember Dr. King. Adam Clayton Powell, Reverend Sharpley said he was the Martin Luther King of the North.
Right.
Adam Clayton Powell was a trailblazer, Abyssinian Baptist Church, Harlem, New York. He was the Prince of Harlem. He laid the foundation for many of the things that the Civil Rights Movement, SCLC, and SNCC fought for. He was actually in Congress working to get that done. I spent time talking about him as well.
So lastly, look, can you say something about the tension between the transition from activism to administration, to use your terms, or even as it relates to the tension between a politician and a prophet?
Fulfilling both roles. The tension is, how do I effectively speak the truth, thus saith the Lord, using the King James perspective, using what God is telling us to do, while at the same time having a voice to everybody. Now, we do not live in a theocracy. Our role is not to take the biblical commands and create a society from that. But theology frames our paradigm in the public sector. So having a tension where I'm being true to my calling while at the same time leading this unique group of people. Most politicians who do this balance, they're saying they don't take off one hat. You can effectively do both, but having balance at the same time.
Please tell us your name and the institution you're affiliated with.
My name is Dr. Ronaldo Anderson, and I'm an assistant professor of teacher education and humanities at Harris-Stowe State University.
And you are a big wig as far as we know, right? So tell us something about this notion of Afrofuturism, especially for somebody who has absolutely no clue about what it is.
Okay, originally the term Afrofuturism was coined in the early 90s by people like Mark Deary and other people around the same time, and it was then primarily relegated to dealing with speculative fiction or science fiction, literature or music in terms of its conception. Now in the 21st century is moving on to expand more areas in terms of looking at things like theoretical physics, such as the work done by S. James Gates, and is looking at other items related to applied sciences and the humanities. And so, and we're so Afrofuturism is going through its second wave it's the second generation of people actually dealing with the concept now. One of the things I argue about Afrofuturism, it has at least 4 dimensions to it. The first dimension is going to be metaphysics in terms of dealing with ontology, cosmology, cosmogony, or structure of the universe. The second dimension is going to be dealing with aesthetic productions such as music, literature, performance. The third dimension is going to be focused on dealing with theoretical and applied sciences, theoretical science such as math, physics, geometry, and applied science such as architecture, agriculture, and computer science. And then the fourth dimension would be in the social sciences such as psychology, anthropology, sociology, and looking at works within those fields, works by people like Marimba Ani, Molefi Asante, Saloni Keto, in terms of Africa and African history. And those would be at least 4 minimal dimensions that would be present for within an Afrofuturist framework.
So tell me how Afrofuturism can help or aid, I'm talking about what Sly Stone called everyday people, especially everyday black folks.
Well, the first thing I think that drew it to me, Afrofuturism allows us to take back the control of our own imagination. And instead of having somebody else be in charge of thinking us what we can imagine about ourselves, is really putting ourselves back at the center of discussion, our location in terms of what do we want to see for ourselves, for our own progeny in 100 years from now.
Wow. I heard you're an alpha man. I dare you throw up the 5. Just repeat after me. Say shout out to the pastor and the professor.
Hey, shout out. I'd like to say the shout out to Reverend Fisher and the congregation. I know you all are blessed by the work that he's doing there, and hope he's able to deliver a message that's going to take you all into the future.
All right. Shout out to pastor and the professor. I need you to say that.
Shout out to the pastor and professor.
Peace. Can you please state your name and your institutional affiliation?
Joseph Tucker Edmonds. I'm an assistant professor at Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis.
What's your specific area of research, or what's your specific discipline if you had to choose one?
I would say religious studies and Africana studies, and I focus on alternative Christian practices in the African diaspora.
So please tell us something about your presentation that you gave at the National Council of Black Studies.
I want folks to think about and look more intently at alternative Christian spaces, particularly alternative Black Christian spaces. And so I was looking at how I think that those spaces really challenge the ways in which Black race and Black bodies have been theorized in the 21st century.
You were particularly inspired by some of the work of Carlton Pearson. Can you say something about him?
Definitely. I'm just really inspired by a lot of the movements that are challenging Orthodox Christian worldviews and the ways in which they're using that to open up spaces of liberation for Black folks and Black bodies.
So if I had to ask you to give some advice to the everyday, ordinary person of faith, what would it be for you?
I would say read and read some more.
All right. So let's just give a shout out, just repeat after me. Shout out to the pastor and the professor.
Shout out to the pastor and the professor.